Welcome to the Physician Wealth Med podcast. It's wealth medicine for doctors. If you're a doctor and you have no time, it looks like you found us just in time. This podcast is for all doctors who would like to work on their personal wealth, but do not have traditional hours to do so because they have no time. We're here to jump into topics that will help you address your wealth both inside and outside of your practice so that you can live the life of significance you're dreaming of. You'll hear from your peers, you'll hear from industry professionals, and your host and wealth advisor, me, Kevin Sullivan. This is your time. Now let's get started with today's podcast. Welcome to Physician Wealth Meds, a wealth podcast for doctors. And we like to say it's wealth medicine for doctors. And we've got a really good podcast for you today with Michael Sims. He's the president of Veracity Advisors. Just wanted to give you a quick note up front. We wanted to make sure that you understand that we're trying to provide you educational content that's relevant, that's hard-hitting, so that in your time, when you're driving home or when you have some free time, because we know you're busy, that you'll be able to take these podcasts and listen to them and deepen your financial understanding. So we don't make any recommendations on the show. We would have to know your personal situation before we ever do things like that, but you can always get in contact with us or our guests, and we can help you there that way too. Michael Sims is an advisor, been in the business for over 3 decades. He specializes in business valuation. So this is a topic that we hear a lot of physicians, doctors, dentists, whatever the specialty is, like to know more information about. So I just thought I'd bring Mike on, have him on the podcast. So thank you so much today, Michael, for joining me for this podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Kevin. It's an interesting time, and I seek and am grateful for every opportunity to kind of get the word out, so that we can really help people really benefit from their life's effort, their sweat equity, their life's effort, and be able to live the retirement, the future, the legacy, really develop the legacy that they've intended.
That's a good point, because we talk a lot on our podcast about helping doctors build and create and maintain their wealth inside of their practice, but also outside. And it's what you do outside your practice that's going to financially take you through, possibly for generations to come, if you do it right. And I understand that they're starting to label you as the valuation guy now.
Yeah, it's, so Veracity Advisors, we're members of a national registered investment advisory firm. We do virtual family office services, but really the one key point that you said, and we've done for over 7 years, is focused on doing valuations for business owners, and that crosses over every business category and model. And it's where we found it, having had years in the medical business as a part of a technology company and part of a distributor, understanding those dynamics in that business cycle. Really, my passion coming in to this industry was to say, how do we engage business owners, be it in the medical space or others, to really benefit, right? So if you're not planned, you're not prepared, you don't know where you're at in the growth of your business, the day's going to come when you leave it. And the question is, when you leave it, is it going to have achieved what it was that you had dreamt of when you came in? And,
good point.
Stage one for us, it led us down the concept of exit planning, right? And nobody wants to talk about exit planning. Having a conversation about exit planning with a small business owner is akin to having a conversation with your parent about life insurance. Like they don't want to talk about it, right? Nobody wants to think about that. But, truly, as we try to emphasize the business owners, they are going to leave their business one day. And I like to say either vertically or horizontally. We prefer vertical, right? We want you to be able to leave on your own accord, not die at your desk. But if you did die at your desk, have you done the planning and preparation to that your legacy for everything that you've done, your family, your loved ones, your community, your charity, whatever it is, will benefit from all that work. So it's really, people need to see, as they're an entrepreneur, what they're building is really the first stage of that legacy that they hope to achieve.
That's a good point. We did a podcast just a few short weeks ago about protecting your practice and your legacy at any age. So if you're a physician just coming out of med school and you got yourself a practice and you're out there doing what you're supposed to be doing, I mean, there's some value there that needs to be either protected from a legacy point of view, but even from a business valuation view. If you don't know have a baseline or you don't know where you are, how are you going to know where you're going?
And that's where we really developed and honed down the concept of sharing with business owners. And this is every business owner. These are dentists, these are doctors, these are manufacturers, distributors, whatever they may be, right? A business's value really is only to the degree that someone would pay for it. We can create an inflated value for the sake of covering with insurance or what have you. But when you really intrinsically boil it down, the business that you have is only really valuable to the point that someone would want to pay for it. And what does it take for someone to put money into what you have? And that is the assurance of a revenue stream that they're going to get back from the money that they put in. So if I buy a stock on in the New York Stock Exchange, I have an expectation of growth and dividends and what have you, right? I have the expectation that I'm going to be able to sell the stock one day at a gain, right? I'm not going to go in today and buy Enron because it's non-existent. It's not going to ever be. And it's just a waste of money, right? So someone is going to value your business to the degree that they're going to look at the revenue stream and say, I can justify putting $10 million into this because it's going to yield me over the next 5-10 years, X amount of revenue, doing nothing. And that's the big point. If you can look at it and say doing nothing else, it will grow that revenue. Then an investor is going to pay top dollar. So where we got with the valuations, and you talked about when we call it benchmarking with business owners and dentists and physicians to say, look, if 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you want to sell your business and your expectation for your legacy is I want to exit and be able to get $10 million from my business. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. But where are you starting from? Do you know?
Great point.
Do you know? I mean, and most business owners have said, well, I heard around the pool, X multiple times earnings. Like, that's a gross generalization. Wouldn't it be worth it to do just a quick valuation, get a sense for where you are numerically? We also offer as a part of our valuation service what we call value driver analysis, right? Look at the value drivers within that business that are going to determine the sellability. That's really what you're looking at. So when you look at any entity, be it a business in the medical field or not, a buyer wants to know what are they going to have income stream wise that they don't have to work for. Are they going to get their investment back? And are they going to be able to grow it? Right. So we're able to look at it and determine those intrinsic drivers of the business. I always love to say, and it's especially true with the physician practice, if you can't take 6 weeks vacation, you're running your business wrong. You've got a job. True story. When we first got in 7 years ago, started doing valuations, we did a valuation for a firm that specialized in recycling of electronics. The average electronics recycler per month sends maybe 4 shipping containers to foundries, big shipping containers on ships. These guys were doing 35 a week. Their business was worth $40 million. But the first thing that I noticed when I did the valuation was I said to the business owner, this is not sellable because you as the business owner do everything, make every decision, engage with every external resource. You're doing the contracting, you're doing the discussions with the foundry, you're making every administrative legal decision. Like you can't take even one day of vacation, everything stops. Right. So if I'm a buyer for $40 million, I'm not buying that business for $40 million unless I own the business owner in perpetuity till I get my money back. So that's a lot on the same lines, when you look at valuations for practices of professionals, any professional, and I had this conversation very recently with a good friend who's a dentist. How many of your patients visit you because of the personal relationship that they have with you? Now, I understand over the past 30 years, the practice of medicine has vastly changed, and practitioners are challenged to really develop personal relationships. And those physicians who can develop the personal relationships have a stronger working environment because they get great referrals and people are always talking great about them and sending them, right? But what happens when you leave the practice? Do those people stay with the new practitioner or do they not? And so we often call that, when someone goes to sell their business and someone has a buyer, you might get a letter of intent to buy your business for 5 times gross earnings, which could be great. But that just opens the door for the buyer to come in and do the due diligence. And I joke with a lot of business owners and CPAs that I deal with that nowhere in the recorded history of business sales has a buyer come back in and offered more money on a business because it's so well run. They're given the top dollar that they're willing to pay. And then in the due diligence phase, they go in and look for the reasons they want discounts. And if you're a physician running a single physician practice, say in general practice or family practice, and you've got great relationships, which is a hallmark and something to be very proud of as you're operating the business. But when you go to sell it, someone's going to look at it and say, 50% of these patients are going to leave and find someone else. How can I give you full value for that projected revenue? I want a discount. And so that's where, when we want to come in and benchmark and say, where are you right now? Let's look at how much of this, do you have to be there every day? Do you have junior physicians who are coming in, working, and nurse practitioners? Are you building something that is scalable if you want to, but has the ability to operate without your presence every day? Then you're going to get the most revenue. If you're under contract, things like recurring revenue streams versus transactional revenue streams. I always love the analogy of the security firm. For every $1 million of revenue they generate in their hardware business, where they go out and install the hardware, and that's $1 million of net free revenue. That's valued at 50%, right? So that's worth a buyer $500,000. But on the contract for the service, every $1 million is worth $2.5 million, because those people are locked in and it's going to be a recurring revenue stream. So that's really where we try to sit down and look with the business owner, attorneys, doctors, dentists, whatever. It's like, how can you redesign your model to add more of these recurring revenue streams? You see a lot in the concierge medicine space, right? That's a very strong element for valuations, because people have signed up and they're paying specific revenue to the physician practice, monthly, quarterly, annually, to access their services. It's kind of like Amazon Prime. If you think about Amazon Prime, I think there's 20 million members of Amazon Prime who pay $120 every January 1st, if you think about it that way. That's $2.4 billion Jeff Bezos has for what?
Yeah. And you get that baseline established. That, what Mike is talking about, is so priceless. And if you haven't had that aha moment yet, we were looking at how you can design a business valuation for growth and for an exit strategy. So let's just maybe forget about the exit strategy and just say, taking what you just said as a roadmap for growth.
Right.
So you have those key performance indicators that you can say, okay, here's maybe 6, 7, or 8 of them, and here's where you can better your business by doing number 3 first, and you can prioritize them. I'm sure, right? You can speak to this.
Absolutely.
But use that as a roadmap for growth, and that will help you design your practice. And maybe, like you were saying, you need to step out a little bit so that you can have others activated in your practice, so that you can have more sellability, more scalability, and all of that.
Right. And, and for the pediatricians who might be listening, I always like to say someone has to tell the parents that their baby's not that pretty. To everybody, their baby's beautiful, right? But someone's got to say it's not as pretty as you think. And I would always like to say, that's not bad news to a business owner. It can be the most liberating conversation that we have with a business owner is to say, your baby is beautiful to you, but could get a lot prettier to a buyer. If you were able to implement these processes in your overall plan, because it makes it of higher value to them. So where the trend has moved in the valuation of businesses, it used to be, hey, look at earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, EBITDA, right? Multiples of EBITDA or multiples of gross revenue. But a lot of the valuations these days are rolling over to what's called seller's discretionary earnings. So the SDE, which would take your EBITDA, right, your earnings, but then it would also add back in owner benefit. So if you're the physician and you're taking W-2 earnings, you're maybe running your cell phone through the business, your car, your automotive expense, whatever it is that you're leveraging the business structure of your business for to minimize taxes on your operational basis, right? Add all that back in, right? And then based on where you are and the industry that you're in, we're able to define and really discern an effective valuation. And our valuations that we typically do, we utilize an online service and we can derive liquidation value, enterprise value, equity value, and asset sale value. Typically, in most businesses, asset sale value would be the preferred transactional amount. And I always like to say, the liquidation value is you don't wake up in the morning and mom's got to sell all the assets of the business to pay all the debts of the business, and that's what you have left, right? So you get an assessment, where might the value of the practice be if somebody wanted the business strategically? Where would someone be if they wanted to buy the asset and the goodwill of the business? Then, what would be left in the event that I didn't wake up in the morning? And using those gives you a great platform to plan. Kevin, as you said, you talked earlier in a previous podcast about, covering yourself, right? Covering yourself. And I got into this business and honed on it about 15 years ago when I lost a spouse. And I remember my surgeon, who I'd had surgery from, I used to see his wife at the school all the time with the kids. And she one day came running up and pronounced to me that they had purchased a bunch more life insurance on the surgeon. And, the epiphany that hit me, and this was before I was really into the world of these products, as I said to her, Alicia, I know Julio is a wonderful father and he's a wonderful husband. But what about you? Do you have a plan for you? And her response was, no. He makes enough money. He could hire an au pair, take care of the kids, this and that. And I said, Alicia, there are very few people in this world I would let take a knife to my body willingly. And Julio is one of them. But he's not touching me for at least a year if something happened to you, right? Because psychologically, right, I know my space was I've got kids to raise. I've got small children, right? Is having that plan, what happens if, and that's such a great question that our industry needs to be better at positioning to people without the guilt of you're a bad person if you haven't thought of this, but to say, what happens if, really explore that. What happens if your spouse doesn't wake up in the morning or becomes disabled in an accident, right? And you have small children. I mean, how do you go back to work the next day? I told her, I said, Julio's not going to be in the OR for 12 months easily, right? So it's really looking at those personal human elements of life that we never think is going to happen to us. But those of us who take the time to think about it and plan are so much better prepared. Addendum to that story, 5 years later, Julio laid down for a nap on New Year's Day and didn't wake up. And his family was well provided for as a result. But those are the things that we as business owners get caught up in, the day-to-day demands. I always love to talk directly with business owners, and I say, let me guess, the big thing on your mind is you got to make payroll, you got to pay quarterly taxes. What else, right? That's as entrepreneurs and you have employees, that's what your focus is.
Yeah.
And you're not stopping to pause and say, am I building anything of value? Is my life's work what I'm passionate about? Or am I just an employee to myself?
Right.
And that might be suitable and acceptable to some. Others, it might not be. Well, if you don't know, when do you want to find out? And that's where we advocate saying, look, let's do evaluation. It's not that difficult. It's not that hard. It's not that costly. We're not doing evaluation that's certified to go to court. And, the IRS accepts the methodology that we operate under. We use it a lot with partnerships and with CPAs, people wanting to gift ownership shares of their business, right? So we can crank out that sort of valuation for a business owner within a week's time at a reasonable expense, so that they can now say, okay, now I know what that element of my wealth is worth, right? Because as an entrepreneur, 80% of your net worth is your business.
Right. And they're just going about life day to day, surgery after surgery, patient after patient. But then when you stop and you see your financial life on paper, it just really takes a whole different dimension, especially when you talk about the benchmarking against other dental practices or other PI doctor, chiropractic. You can see where you rank in that type of a benchmarking category. Right. It could really make you feel a lot better saying, okay, I feel good in real life, or things are messy over here, but I really look good on paper. But either way, the disconnects and start to be connected again.
Kevin and I have met through a network of advisors passionate to do it right, to work with networks of professionals to solve client problems and not just sell them something, and unfortunately our predecessors have created such a bias in clients and in other professionals. Oh, the financial advisor guy's here. But if what we're really trying to do is solve a challenge for people, is to pose those questions and take the time to understand what they hope to achieve, and to be able to have the conversation sometimes that are difficult, that most people don't want to have or like to have, is to say, you're not on track. You could do this differently and grow in your personal freedom, and grow in your work-life balance, and grow in your personal net worth, your business's health and strength, and really just be that second set of eyes that is collaborating with the legal intimate, the tax planning intimate, the wealth management and risk management. And where I've seen that, where it's been a disservice to a lot of professionals, service providers, there are a ton of firms out there that say, oh, dental's funny, dental's the worst. You can only get valuation in your practice done by someone who does dental practice valuations. It's not rocket science. It's not the fundamentals of the dental business, the depreciation of acquired assets, the amortization, the cost of doing business, the revenue. It's the same as any other business, right? It's just you've had people try to take advantage of market share by saying, oh, this is where you have to go. And what I've always liked to do is push back on those and invite those people to do valuations. Hey, if you're doing that valuation, let us, give us access. We'd love to do a valuation and mirror it and see, who's different. And in a lot of those cases, those firms will do it, but the professionals had to sign, an exclusive agreement that if they want to sell their business, they have to sell it through them as a broker. Well, we don't offer that. We're talking about is how do we benchmark your business so you can make it bigger and better. If you want to sell it in 2 years, great. If you want to sell it in 20 years, great. We're about, hey, how do we build off of what we got? Right.
Right.
So it's really finding those service providers, high-end dentists here locally in Palm Beach Gardens, who they just laughed after I did valuations for them. And they're like, we're never going back to those other people. Our agreement's going to expire in a year and we're not looking to sell anytime soon, but Mike, we'll have you do it. I advocate, look, do it once a year, do it every other year, right? Keep a tab on the value you're building in your business so you understand that trajectory. And if it's not going on the right angle, what do you need to do to adjust that?
And wouldn't you like to know sooner than later, like you were saying? Right. I mean,
yeah. And here's the great thing. And I know we talked about exit planning and growth, but they're symbiotic in the relationship that everything has an end to it. Right. And I always love to tell the story. I don't know if you can see down here is an article from the Seward Journal. Seward is a very small town in Alaska. My great grandfather walked there during the gold rush and started a family business. Our family owned the business for 127 years. My grandmother ran it. My aunt and uncle ran it. My aunt and uncle, not long ago, were in their 80s and came downstairs and locked the doors. That was the exit strategy that they ended up employing. They never, they were formerly in the real estate world. They went to one business broker and listed it, and they couldn't sell it, couldn't get a buyer to go to Alaska to buy a retail operation in a year. So they said, all right, we'll just close it. And it wasn't until after the fact that everybody in the family found out they had sold the business.
Oh my.
And so I'm like sitting there going like, well, especially with today's world, there were cousins. We were like, we could have all collaborated and run it from, you don't have to live in Alaska 12 months out of the year to run a business in Alaska. Matter of fact, very few people do these days. So it's like that legacy of the family business could have continued to grow and be a legacy. And I don't blame my aunt and uncle, but they only had that amount of information. They didn't ask enough people to learn the different avenues to exit, the different, or what were their shortfalls of how they were running their business? What was it that made it not interesting for someone to purchase? Right? They just got to the point where they said, we're done. We want to sell it. And there wasn't a buyer for the way they ran their business. And that's where I got passionate about saying, benchmark today, figure out today what it's worth and what its weaknesses are. So you can make those subtle strategic changes as you move along. Yeah. That when you decide to leave vertically, not horizontally, right? When you decide to leave, now there's competitive bidders for it. I'm working with a business right now in the Southwest that's specifically in the home health and hospice space. She is a wonderful lady who has built the business and had the vision to really build the business. Right. So she's not the one anymore doing, the patient calls, right? She's hired the staff. She's built the IT models, the process. And she has two suitors bidding against each other for her business. And the last bid, right? She's 50. The most recent bid is 30 million. So you can take a non-glamorous component of the medical field and you can build a business out of it, right? You can build a business, trust the right people, build a business that becomes marketable and create a tremendous legacy for yourself by exposing yourself to that sort of analysis, that sort of assessment, that sort of benchmark.
That's huge. I like to use the word transition. If you get these fundamentals done, taking care of your business valuation, you're monitoring it periodically, you don't even have to think about the word retirement because that could ruffle up your feathers. That could give you all kinds of weird vibes, But if you think about transition, it's already in place. We've done the work all the way up to this part, and we're just going to transition into our next mission in life. We're going to transition and do what we've always wanted to do to live that life of significance, but it's already, the legwork was done long before you got to that exit.
I was getting in these long debates with people in our industry because they would talk succession planning as exit plan. I thought, no. Succession planning is a leadership protocol that you implement into your business, right? I have a friend, Tay, I was a cavalry officer way back. And I always remember one of my first platoon sergeant, Guy Kakowski. If you're listening from the Albuquerque area, Guy lives in Albuquerque. It was the epiphany that stayed with me as a young lieutenant and now, well into my life. He said, sir, your job as a leader of this platoon here in West Germany on the East German border is to make sure that we're all trained up on knowing what we have to do to be able to go home. Every person needs to know the next job up, because you have to expect that the first bullet of any conflict is going to hit you in the head, sir. Then what do we do? How do we operate? We need to go home. How are we successful? Now, how you train us in that fashion determines what direction the bullet's coming from, the front or the rear, but that's on you, Right. And I really thought about that over time. I've never forgotten that. I did give him I wrote an article on it on LinkedIn and gave him a big shout out. But, your job as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, really is developing a business and implementing leadership succession within your business. Ultimately, the beauty of it is when you get tired of doing what you're doing on every day, where are you going? What are you doing? Right? Ideally, most people, and it's in the order of 75 to 80%, would like to spend the time being CEO. Would you like to spend 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week on your business? And with the remaining time on your family or other endeavors, traveling, right? And you can do that if you build your practice accordingly, right? That now you've removed yourself from the touch of the patient, right? But you can still go around and Mrs. Smith's coming in and say hello to her and make her feel good and important and special. But you're looking at the numbers. How's the marketing of the practice going versus your competitors? What are the revenue streams generated? What are the contract changes with Medicare and the insurance carriers? It's not the glamorous stuff, right? But you can do those in a process if you have the right processes in place. Right, you can go in and do all your touch points and drive more revenue and yield more as the CEO of the practice, so that when you really decide, okay, I want out of medicine, it's a legacy defining moment. You can sell it, you can merge it. You've got, in the case of this lady and how she's built home health care and hospice services, where you have private equity firms who are tripping over themselves trying to buy it. And it's that they're not specifically looking to buy the caregivers who are visiting the patients, but they're looking to buy her process, right? Her ingrained process and services that are built throughout her practice. Guess what? She's going to keep all the real estate. So she's still going to make a ton of money off of the practice and the PE firms, right? But she created it so that she, with a BSN, RSN, she's not the caregiver. She hasn't given care unless she's wanted to jump in probably 15 years.
Right. See, that's excellent.
But she built it 20 years ago. So she did the patient in for 5 years, and then she worked on the business.
I know statistics say that 1 out of 4 doctors, or 25% of doctors, I guess, is 65. And 50 to 60% of burnout rate. When you look at those in the surveys that are taken, you put those two together, and that's a pretty lethal combination. You got someone who's 65 and burnt out. I just think that this would go a long way, having a business valuation to be able to let you ride off and live on your own terms because you know the numbers.
And here's the thing, it all boils down to there's a common denominator amongst medical providers, and that it's that they have an intrinsic gene of serving people. If you could create, and I've got a dear friend, neighbor, lives across the street from me here in Palm Beach Gardens. He ran his practice for so many years, sold it, went down to the VA, said, hey, this is a perfect job for me. I could limit my time frame. I could live my life, but I could still go in and see patients and serve patients, and most physicians don't want to walk away from serving people, right?
Right.
So if they are going to make an exit, right, what are you doing beyond the exit? Do you have philanthropy? And when we talk exiting, right, we want to make sure that his 0.75% of entrepreneurs who sell their business are miserable within 6 months because they don't know what to do. And you can only play so much golf, right? But if you're a physician, that's even more important because you define your life by giving and serving people, and people's really, really important needs is their health. So why not build that into your practice up front so you don't have to have that momentous exit of the right? Build your business so you can stay engaged and profit from this legacy that you've built in your community, right? Mm-hmm. And still be able to serve and get that sense of service to these people. And it really, you can't do it. I mean, we take it back down to the valuation engagement. How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you're at?
Right.
You know, how do you know? And, you know, it's funny to have conversations where people are so dead certain they know where they're going. But then when you say, well, where are you in your career? Or where are you in the development of your business? And they haven't the faintest clue. And that's where we have found a lot of traction with professional service providers and have the conversations of them. How are you engaging your clients, right? How are you engaging your patients? Yeah. So if you sold your business, maybe you sold it to your family member and then you were leaving the business. How many of those patients are going to stay because they're loyal to you and your family? Have they developed the partnership, the relationship, the patient provider relationship is such that I've left providers because their nephew came in. I'm like, nope, not him. I'm leaving. Yeah, I'll go find somebody else. Right. So that's always, you know, but those conversations can be had as we go through the revenue numbers.
Right.
As we go through how strong are these revenue numbers, how likely are they able to sustain? Because again, to the very first thing we said, your practice is a box that spits out revenue. What's that revenue? What is the reliability of that revenue worth over the next 5 to 10 years? What sort of, year one is probably going to stay very similar, but year 2, 3, 4, 5, what sort of discounts do I need? Because they're going to start finding other physicians.
Absolutely.
That's where you're building it and, you know, and understanding that physician, as with any other entrepreneur, can really build something that they can phase out of, be CEO of, stay connected to, be the face of, and really live a life that they desire to live once they're done with the daily grind of providing the personal service.
Well, that's awesome. I just want to thank you so much for being on our podcast here today. As we bring this to a close, we've been talking to Michael Sims. He's the president and CEO of Veracity Advisors. Mike, tell us how they can get in touch with you, maybe your contact information or things like that.
Well, I would say if you want to get in contact with me, contact Kevin. The best route is to go through Kevin. I can give you my website. I can give you my phone numbers or email or what have you, and it'll come and go. You're LinkedIn and you're listening to Kevin. Call Kevin. Again, I work with advisors like Kevin in support of their efforts. Kevin obviously has built a great conduit for physicians and a focus on that service and that practice of service that even if you called me directly, I would be saying, hey, we got to get Kevin involved. We're not going to engage with you. It wouldn't be worth it, right? It really would not provide the emphasis of value to the physician if you were not involved as well. So get in touch with Kevin. You've got the podcast here and the contact information from Kevin. Kevin can reach me. Believe me, he knows my personal cell phone number.
Yes.
And, pretty much where I'm going to be. But I always like to go back through the channel of people that are trusted advisors and really work that avenue.
Well, like you said, the key is value. We just want to make sure we're providing the upfront value. Mike is at the top of his game. He knows exactly what he's doing. I love reaching out to you when we have these opportunities come up. And I wanted to make sure that you were well into this podcast. So
yeah, I
thank you for your time.
Yes, Kevin, this is an awesome way to reach people, and it's an awesome avenue to really emphasize the personal impact of it. And I truly believe people do business with people they trust and people they like. Right. And the more you build this out, give us opportunities to advocate on your behalf and for what we do, the people who listen to the podcast will understand there is a difference between advisors who are trying to sell things and constantly just, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and eschewing that and saying, look, we want to solve really complex problems and challenges. Right. And the fun for us and how we do our work every day is we don't know what we get to do or what we get to learn, but every day is new. And that's why at my advanced age, someone said, are you ever thinking about getting out of what you don't know? I love what I'm doing. I love being engaged, and every day is a learning experience and an opportunity for us to help people and make a fundamental difference in their future. So
very well said. I couldn't have said it better, but ditto right back. We have a passion for what we do.
Exactly.
And so I thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your time today, and we'll connect with you soon.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thank you. Michael Sims is not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Physician Wealth Meds. Securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member at FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in the podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies and investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. That's our podcast for today. And remember, if you're not working on your personal wealth, who is? Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Any questions about what you heard today, please send an email to kdsullivan@lpl.com. Physician Wealth Meds, wealth medicine for doctors.